For 22 years, I got a birthday card from a man I had never met. Same handwriting, same blue ink, same $5 bill folded inside, all the way through college, even after $5 stopped buying anything but a coffee. The return address was always the same too, a P.O. box in a small town in Tennessee called Sweetwater. I had to look it up on a map the first time I noticed. I'm 24 now. The card never came this year. 3 weeks after my birthday, a different envelope arrived. It was from a lawyer. And what was inside that envelope made me get in my car and drive 600 miles to a town I had never been to bury a man I had never met, to find out who I really was. My name is Hannah. This is the story of the stranger who knew me my whole life, and the reason my mother never wanted me to know him. The first card came when I turned 2. I don't remember it, obviously, but my mother kept it, the way she kept everything from those years, pressed inside a Bible that had belonged to her grandmother, the spine cracked from being opened too many times. The card had a teddy bear on the front. Inside, in careful blue handwriting, it said, "Happy birthday, Hannah girl, 2 years old, be good for your mama. A friend." A $5 bill was tucked inside. There was no return address on that first one. My mother told me later she almost threw it away. She thought it was a mistake. Some uncle on my father's side, maybe, who had heard the news late and didn't know what to send. But the next year, 3 years old, another one came. Same handwriting, same $5 bill. This time with a return address, P.O. Box 47, Sweetwater, Tennessee. We lived in Indianapolis. We didn't know anyone in Tennessee. My mother told me when I was old enough to understand, maybe I was 8, that the cards were probably from my father, that he had died in a car accident when I was a baby, that maybe a relative of his was sending them on his behalf, the way some families did. I believed her. Of course I did. She was my mother. So every year I waited for the card. Every year it came, 2 days before my birthday, like clockwork. Same blue ink, same $5 bill. Same closing line, "Be good for your mama." And every year I would open it and run my fingers over the handwriting and think, this is the closest I'll ever get to him. The cards became the shape of my childhood. When I was 7, I started writing back. I would address my letters to P.O. Box 47, Sweetwater, Tennessee, and I would tell him everything. About my school, about my best friend Megan, about the time I broke my arm falling off the swings, about how I missed him, even though I had never known him. He never wrote back to my letters, but the next birthday card always seemed to know what I had told him. If I had written about getting glasses, the next card would say, "Hope you can see all the candles on the cake this year, Hannah girl." If I had written about losing a tooth, the next card would say, "Tell the tooth fairy I said hi." I asked my mother once if she thought he was reading them. She said very carefully that she didn't know, that sometimes things found their way to people in ways we couldn't explain. She was a careful woman, my mother. I didn't realize until much later how much of her carefulness was about protecting me from something. I just thought it was who she was. When I turned 18, the card was different. It still had the blue handwriting, still had a bill inside, although now it was a $100 bill instead of 5, but the message was longer. "Happy 18th, Hannah girl. You're a woman now. I want you to know that wherever you go, whatever you become, somebody who has never met you is going to be proud of you, whether you ever know him or not. Be good for your mama." I cried for an hour. I told my college roommate about it the next day, and she cried too. I taped the card to the wall above my desk, and it stayed there for all 4 years of school. I wrote back, like I always did. I told him I was studying social work, that I wanted to help kids in foster care, that my mother had been my whole world, and I was scared to leave her, but she was making me go. The next year, when I turned 19, the card said, "Helping kids who need somebody. That's a beautiful life, Hannah girl. The best ones I ever knew were the people who decided early that other folks mattered." That's when I started to wonder, because that didn't sound like a relative passing along a message. That sounded like somebody who knew me. I asked my mother again the summer I came home from college. I sat her down at the kitchen table. I asked her point blank who was sending the cards. She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I knew the answer she was about to give wasn't the whole answer. "Hannah," she said, "some things in this life are gifts, and some gifts come without a receipt. You don't ask the gift where it came from, you just say thank you and you keep it close." I told her that wasn't an answer. She told me that someday I would understand. That was 4 years ago. I let it go because she was getting older and her hands were starting to shake when she poured the coffee, and I had this terrible feeling that asking too many questions might break something between us. She passed away last spring. Cancer. Quick. Only 7 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral. 2 months after she died, my birthday came around. The card came, like always, blue handwriting, $100 bill folded inside. The message said, "Happy 23rd, Hannah girl. I am so sorry about your mama. She was a good woman, better than I deserved. Be good for yourself now. A friend." I sat with that card for a week. Better than I deserved. A relative wouldn't write that. A relative would say better than the world deserved, or one of a kind, or any of the soft, polite things you say about the dead. Better than I deserved was the sentence of a man who had hurt her, or who thought he had. I started looking. I started searching for a man in Sweetwater, Tennessee, who would have known a woman named Lillian in Indianapolis 25 years ago. I called the post office. They told me they couldn't release information about a P.O. box holder. I gave up, or I almost gave up. Then, this year, I turned 24, and no card came. I waited. I checked the mailbox every day for 3 weeks. Nothing. Then, on a Tuesday in September, an envelope arrived from a law firm in Knoxville, Tennessee. I opened it on the countertop with shaking hands, because I already knew. Some part of me had already known for months. The letter said his name was Walter Hayes. He had passed away on August 17th, 11 days before my birthday, at the age of 78, in a hospice in Sweetwater, Tennessee. He had named me as a partial beneficiary of his estate, and he had left a sealed letter to be delivered to me only after his death, with instructions that I read it before I made any decisions about whether to come to the small memorial his neighbors were planning. I drove down 2 days later. I drove for 9 hours straight, with the lawyer's envelope on the passenger seat and Walter's letter unopened in my purse, and a feeling in my chest like the world was about to tilt onto a different axis. I checked into a motel just outside Sweetwater. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the letter. The letter was 11 pages. Walter Hayes had been a long-haul trucker for 46 years. He'd grown up in eastern Tennessee, the youngest of 7 children, in a house with no indoor plumbing until he was 9 years old. He had never finished high school. He had been married once, briefly, in his 20s, and had no children of his own. In the spring of 2001, he'd been driving a route from Memphis up through Indianapolis when he stopped for the night at a diner off the interstate. A young woman was working the late shift behind the counter. Her name tag said Lillian. She was 26 years old. She was 4 months pregnant. She had a bruise on her left cheek that she had tried to cover with makeup, and a wedding ring that she kept twisting on her finger like it was too tight. Walter had ordered coffee and a slice of pie. He had stayed for 3 hours. He had watched the way she flinched every time the door chimed. He had watched the way she put her hand protectively over her belly when she thought no one was looking. When he paid his check, he left her his business card with a phone number on the back. He wrote, "If you ever need a way out, you call this number, day or night. No questions, no conditions." She called him 11 days later. He drove 400 miles to come get her. He didn't take her home. He didn't take her to his sister's place. He didn't take her anywhere people might think to look. He drove her to a women's shelter outside of Cincinnati that he'd heard about from another driver years before. He paid for her first month of rent in a small apartment in a different city after that, in cash so there would be no paper trail. He bought her a used Honda Civic. He helped her file for divorce in a state where her husband couldn't easily contest it. He never asked for anything in return. He never told her his last name. She had asked him the day he left her at the apartment why he had done it, why he was doing it. He had told her, because somebody should have done it for my mama, and nobody ever did. That was the last time he saw her. But every year on the day she had told him her baby was due, he sent her a birthday card to the address she had given him before he left. After the first card, she had sent him a thank you note with a P.O. box on it, a way to reach her safely without giving him her real address. He used that P.O. box for 22 years. He never wrote anything that would have given him away. He never visited, he never called. He had decided in his own quiet way that the kindest thing he could do for her was to stay a stranger, so that whatever life she built, no one could ever pull on a thread back to her old one. But he wanted her to know, and he wanted me to know, that someone in this world was watching us grow up from a great distance and was glad we were alive. The last paragraph of his letter said this: "Hannah girl, you are not my daughter. I want to be clear about that. You had a father and he was not a good man, and your mama did the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do, which was to walk out of his life with you still inside her and never look back. She didn't owe me anything for the help. She didn't owe anybody anything. The only thing she ever owed was to you, and she paid that debt every single day of her life. I sent you the cards because I wanted you to know what I have known since the day you were born, that the world has people in it who would drive 400 miles for a stranger with no expectation of being thanked. I wanted you to grow up believing in people like that, because the world is full of them. They just don't always tell you who they are. You owe me nothing. You don't have to come to my memorial. You don't have to tell anyone about me. I lived a small life, and I'd like to be remembered small. But if you would do one thing for me, and only if you want to, find someone someday who needs to be driven 400 miles, and drive them, not because you owe it to me, because you'll know by then what your mama knew, that the world keeps turning because of these little, quiet rescues that nobody ever puts in the newspaper. Be good for yourself, Hannah girl. Walter." I went to the memorial. There were 9 people there: a pastor, 2 old trucker friends with white beards and watery eyes, a woman who had run the diner where Walter ate breakfast every morning for the last 15 years, a neighbor who checked in on him at the end, a nurse from the hospice, and me. I sat in the back. I didn't introduce myself. The pastor said Walter had been a quiet man, a private man, who left this earth without owing anyone a single thing. After the service, I left a small bouquet of wildflowers at his grave. I didn't write a card. I just stood there for a while, in the September afternoon light in a town I had never been to, in front of the stone of a man who had loved me every year for 22 years without ever once needing me to know. On the drive home, I called the women's shelter Walter had mentioned in his letter. I told them I was a social worker. I told them I had a flexible schedule. I told them if they ever needed somebody to drive a woman somewhere, anywhere, they could call me, day or night. No questions, no conditions. They thanked me. They took my number. The first call came 2 weeks later. A woman in Lexington, Kentucky, 2 children, a husband who stopped pretending, a bus ticket she had been hiding in a sock for 3 months. I drove 400 miles to come get her. I bought her coffee at a Waffle House at 3 in the morning. I let her cry. I let her not cry. I didn't ask her any questions she didn't want to answer. Before I dropped her off at the safe house in Columbus, she asked me why I was doing it, why I was helping her, and I told her exactly what Walter told my mother 23 years ago, because somebody should have done it for my mama, and somebody did. I keep all 22 birthday cards in a box in the top of my closet now. Sometimes when the year gets heavy, I take them out and I read them in order, from the teddy bear card I got at 2 years old, to the long letter I got at 18, to the last small one, the year my mother died, the one that said, "Better than I deserved." I think about Walter every single day, not because I'm sad, because I'm reminded. He never met me. He saved my life. If you are watching this and you have ever been the recipient of one of those quiet, anonymous rescues, a hand that reached down to you when you didn't know how to ask for help, leave the name of the person you remember in the comments below. We don't have to know their full story. We just have to say their name out loud somewhere so they exist twice, once in the world and once in our memory of them. And if you have ever been the one who drove someone 400 miles in the middle of the night with no expectation of thanks, thank you. Somebody is growing up because of you. They might never know your name, but the world is held together by people like you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We share a new one every week about ordinary people who turned out to be extraordinary when nobody else was watching. Until then, drive somebody when you can.